Hello there, beautiful joy seeker, and welcome back to the I Am Changing podcast. I'm your host, Kaz Humphreys, and I'm a change facilitator. In this episode 59, I'm sharing 4 tips or benefits of why sighing could improve your life. Some people say it's rude not to sigh, but the research I've been doing and the studies that I've done on breath work demonstrate to me that it could actually save your life. As a kid, I was always scolded by adults around me for sighing. And so, if you know me, you'll know that I probably did it more just to piss them off. But it's clear to me now that potentially one of my ADHD, ASD, neurospicey defiance traits was to sigh. But back then, it was one of the few ways that I could express myself when I couldn't find the words, when I felt frustrated or angry. And I was struggling to express myself when I felt heightened. And that was a common thing. And guess what? Expressing yourself as a neurodiverse person can be really challenging, and those big feelings can take over. And so it's probably why I work now with neurospicy people, because I understand their traits and support them to try and make their neurospice their superpower rather than what they feel is their anchor or their weight in life. So through a bit of research and a review of my clinical notes and even my own journal, I've come to understand that sighing is beneficial for a couple of reasons. That sound we make of it's actually a good thing. So benefit number one, the unconscious sigh can be a life-sustaining reflex that helps preserve lung function. It's actually a formulation of a reflex. The sigh is a deep breath. It's not voluntary. So think about this. The sigh often starts as a normal breath, but before you exhale, you take a second breath on top of it. And the involuntary sigh boosts the lungs' ability to exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide. So, in turn, this boosts the function of the alveoli, or those little tiny air sacs where the gas exchange occurs deep in our lungs. And the only way to pop them open again and to allow more oxygen in is to sigh, which brings in twice the volume of a normal breath. Therefore, sighing is brilliant if you're a notorious shallow breather, like someone who's anxious or experiencing dysfunction. Think about the person who gets anxiety or panic and they breathe like a meerkat. That's exaggerated, but that's what they're doing when the teacher's saying, "Oh, can you read aloud to the class?" or "Can I present this thing in front of my colleagues at work?" and you feel like you want to shit your pants, but that's that heightened feeling, and we breathe very shallowly, preparing our body to do the flight fight. Benefit number 2 of the sigh is it regulates some of our body functions. Like, who knew? We breathe in air, which is a mixture of gases, right, to promote oxygen exchange in our body. We have oxygen in, carbon dioxide out. And that rhythm and frequency of your breathing is modulated by more than one part of the brain. This is pretty cool. Well, it's cool for those of us who love brain stuff. So when our blood gas chemistry is balanced, then our organ systems, such as filtration in the kidneys and blood pressure and heart rate, they all respond to the chemoreceptors in different parts of our cells. So when there is balance in our chemistry, there's the right amount of oxygen, the right amount of carbon dioxide, then our nervous system receives the balance signal that all is well in our world. So let me explain a little bit more. Our forebrain, our cortex, the hypothalamus, the amygdala, they all regulate threat and balance assessment during while we're breathing during exercise, because when you get the heart rate pumping, you're moving those big prime muscles like your arms and your legs. You want to make sure you stand upright. And so you will gasp the breath in to keep the oxygen pumping around. We've got these things called afferent pathways. They're regions within the forebrain that regulate the ancillary muscles of the diaphragm, the tongue, The larynx, the pharynx, the chest, the glottis, and the postural muscles that support our breathing mechanisms to synchronize and function normally. For example, being able to talk whilst walking. So those afferent pathways, if you're watching the video, you can see keep everything in the jaw and the neck and the chest open. And whilst the diaphragm is opening up and expanding and allowing the lungs to inflate, we can still hold a conversation. So that part's all managed by the afferent pathway. And it needs to be balanced so that we can swallow, spit, and get the tongue talking and be able to breathe at the same time. The midbrain regulates the exchange of gases, such as oxygen, carbon dioxide, nitrogen. And it's worth noting here that the flow-on effect to blood pressure and functions of the organs like the heart and the kidneys are all controlled here by the midbrain. So the midbrain regulates any changes with our breathing and enables us to respond to fluctuations of internal, external temperatures, as well as our breathing during our sleep, because even that changes whilst we're unconscious. The brain stem, that part of us that drives us when we're doing flight, fight, freeze, or rest and digest, the brain stem regulates our breath based on cognition. So, what we understand is happening in the world around us, and then how we emotionally respond. So, let me talk about, you've heard me talk about the sympathetic nervous system, that flight or fight part of our nervous system. And then the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest, that's all regulated by the brainstem. So if the brainstem says, I think there might be a saber-tooth tiger lurking around, what does that sound? Where is it coming from? Looking everywhere, turning your head. You're in fight or flight. So you will breathe differently, shallowly, and you will pump that oxygen in ready to fight or flee from the saber-tooth tiger. If you're resting and digesting, you're breathing quite rhythmically and not even paying attention to your breath. You're not sucking it in, ready to pounce on the next thing that's coming. And I know that's boring stuff, but when you understand how something as simple as breathing can give you an indication of whether you're stressed or relaxed, whether you can do some breath work to help you sleep, you're then able to influence and override that sympathetic nervous system. You'll know when it's activated. You'll know when you're in a state of flight or fight and be able to create change in your world. Now, according to Dr. Mark Krasnow, well, I'm not sure if he's a doctor, but I'll check that out. Oh, sorry, he's a professor of biochemistry at Stanford University School of Medicine. And this is where the science gets really exciting. He's findings shed light on there's a network of cells along the brainstem that generate the breathing rhythm. Now, Krasnow states that along each side of the brainstem, there's two networks of just 200 neurons that control our sighing reflex. And it's pretty similar to the pacemaker that regulates how fast we breathe. The brain's breathing center also controls the type of breath that we take. Now, Krasnow talks about the sighing reflex is therefore comprised of small numbers of different types of neurons, each with their own stimuli that activate those different types of breath. Now, one area of neurons that he's done some work on is regular breaths, but he's also found that there's another neuron that coordinates sighing. There's one for yawns, sniffing, coughing, laughing, crying, and they're all different neuron regulated. So sighing, he postulates that sighing appears to be regulated by fewer number of neurons than we've seen linked to our fundamental human behavior. And this is the work done by Jack Feldman, and he's a professor of neurobiology at the David Geffen School of Medicine in UCLA. See, I've been doing my research. Benefit 3, sighing can help you with the possible reduction of anxiety. And I think this is one that when I work clinically with people, when we work in group settings like heart meditation, like at the day retreats, breath work is one of the leading things that we do to come into relaxation, come into the heart, come into self in the present moment. UCLA neurobiologist Jack Feldman talks that the sigh is a deep breath, but not a voluntary one. And Feldman continues that it starts as a normal breath, but before you exhale, you take a second breath on top of it. And I didn't know this, but on average, every person sighs every 5 minutes and translates to about 12 sighs per hour. A person with conditions like panic disorder, anxiety, hypervigilance, there's dominated by their overactive sympathetic nervous system. And these types of conditions cause people to tend to breathe shallowly. They don't deeply inflate their lungs or stretch their diaphragm. So when we start to do breath work, it can feel very uncomfortable or abnormal to push your tummy out as you breathe. It's only their chest that moves, and it takes a lot of practice to change the way your body moves when it breathes. And so, one of the first things I will do is I will introduce breath work to improve a client's limited or reduced sighing reflex. And for me, clinically, a sigh is when someone is shifting something through them. So, consciously improving your capacity for breath could actually prove useful in healing your healing experience of conditions like anxiety and possibly other psychiatric conditions where sighing has grown to be quite debilitated. Benefit four, it can help regulate our emotions. The mechanism behind emotional root causes of conscious sighing apparently remains a mystery to Western medicine researchers. And Feldman acknowledges there's a component of sighing that relates to an emotional state. When you're stressed, for example, you sigh more. It's one of our trigger releases to let out all of that frustration energy that, or when you're angry. But within Eastern modalities like kinesiology, meditation, hypnosis, we know that the sighing is a non-verbal form of emotional and mental over energy release. Sighing is the process of letting go, releasing that which no longer resonates within your emotional state. The sigh is the physical method for venting some form of mental or emotional stress out of your body. And like I just said, kinesiology and meditation models both depict the deep sigh as the physical and mechanical mechanism that attempts to override the sympathetic nervous system dominance. So when you add the sound of your voice to your sigh, you're then adding your own unique internal vibration. And this acts like a medicinal frequency to the emotional component that you're releasing into the air. It actually makes the sigh easier. It makes the release bigger and easier to let go of. The Heart Math Institute and research undertaken by Dr. Joe Dispenza clearly illustrate that the deep sigh, which is longer than the inward breath, actually downregulates the stimulation from the vagus nerve, and in turn, this downregulates the sympathetic flight or fight reaction. And the cascade effect is that consequentially, this has a very positive effect on the enteric nervous system or your gut. So, in other words, the sigh has a deeply soothing effect on your nervous system. A sigh can be surprisingly simple and allows you to bypass your conscious brain altogether. And this in itself is a natural form of regulation for the emotional self. So it's not rude to sigh. In fact, it's an essential component for you to regulate yourself emotionally. And if you've got children around you, often this is your cue when you hear them sigh. This might be the invitation they're sending you to check in. Hey, mate, is everything okay? What's been happening today? Do you have big feelings? So if they're sighing or they're ramped up, you can get them to sigh and their mirror neurons will hopefully copy you. So here's the formula. It goes like this: 2 inhales followed by an extended exhale. And I often explain, especially when working with children, I want you to blow out your mouth through as if you're just breathing through a straw. So in the video, you can see that sound. So when we breathe in, it's 2 breaths. Pause, breathe in all the way, and then breathe out as if through a straw. You can hear my breath is really long and extended, and I sometimes feel almost lightheaded, but just deeply relaxed. You can do that as often as you need. If you've got a really stressful day, put an alarm on your phone that every half an hour, you're going to just do a reset breath. Stand up, go and get a glass of water, take yourself to the toilet, reset the breath, start again. You know, there's always daily inspirational posts or regular posts on my social media pages. Simply search for me using the links in the show notes below. It helps me to grow my podcast audience. If you could hit the follow and like button, I'd be so grateful. Thanks in advance for sharing this podcast episode with your own family, friends, and Change Tribe. I hope it generates a fire of loving support and proactive discussion of how you can take charge of your journey steps through life, regardless of the challenges that experience brings you. I'm your podcast host, Kaz Humphreys, aka The Change Chick. The I Am Changing podcast is a reminder that we can all choose to change and bloom from within. Thanks for listening today.